Om Sahana Vavatu Sahano Bhunaktu Sahaviryan Karavavahai Tejasvinavadhitamastu ma Vidvishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Om. Good. Welcome back to our weekly Bhagavad Gita class. We will begin with some recitation. We're studying chapter 6 on meditation. We'll begin our recitation with verse 31. As always, please glance at the meaning as I'm chanting and then repeat after me. This is working. Fine. Sarva bhutastitam yo mam, sarva bhutastito yo mam, bhajat yekattvamastitaha, bhajat yekattvamastitaha, sarvata vartamanopi, sarvata vartamanopi, sayogi mai vartate, sayogi mai vartate, atmaupam yena sarvatra, atmaupyam yena sarvatra, samam pashyati Arjuna, samam pashyati Arjuna, sukham va yadiva dukham, sukham va yadiva dukham, sayogi paramo mataha, sayogi paramo mataha. Arjuna vacha, Arjuna vacha, yoyam yogastvaya proktaha, yoyam yogastvaya proktaha, samyena madhusudana, samyena madhusudana, etasyaham na pashyami, etasyaham na pashyami, chanchalatvat sthitam sthiram, chanchalatvat sthitam sthiram, chanchalam hi manah Krishna, chanchalam hi manah Krishna, pramati balavadridham, pramati balavadridham, tasyaham nigraham manye, tasyaham nigraham manye, vayoriva sudushkaram, vayoriva sudushkaram. Shri Bhagavanu Vacha, Shri Bhagavanu Vacha, asamshayam mahabaho, asamshayam mahabaho, manurdur nigraham chalam, manurdur nigraham chalam, abhyasena tu kaunteya, abhyasena tu kaunteya, vairagyena cha grihyate, vairagyena cha grihyate, asamyatatmano manayogo, asamyatatmana yogo, dushprapahiti me matihi, dushprapahiti me matihi, vashyatmana tu yatata, vashyatmana tu yatata, shakyo vaptum utpayataha, shakyo vaptum upayataha. That's a good place to pause, and we'll return to our subject matter. We're coming in today's class towards the end of chapter 6. Just to get the big picture, you remember that chapter 6 on dhyana, meditation, actually began, the first 9 verses began with subject matter carried over from the prior chapter, chapter 5 on sannyasa. Then starting with verse 10, Sri Krishna taught meditation properly, from verses 10 to verse 32, which we completed in our last class. And he taught, first he taught that the alambana, the focal point of meditation for the particular technique taught by Sri Krishna in the Bhagavad Gita, he teaches a technique in which the alambana, the object of meditation, is on the inner divinity, on your true nature as Satchidananda Atma, looking within. Or, Sri Krishna also says, you meditate on his divine presence within you. All those are the same, of course. Satchidananda Atma, inner divinity, Sri Krishna's presence, all three referring to the same inner reality, which is the focal point, or alambana, for the technique of meditation that Sri Krishna teaches. He also taught a lot of practical things about meditation, how to bring your mind back again and again, even how to sit properly in meditation. So he's concluded all of that. And now in the next part of the chapter, we see a couple of questions by Arjuna, leading to the final discussion in this chapter. And with Arjuna's questions, the tone or style of the chapter shifts. It's been quite an intense discussion on the topic of meditation in the verses leading up to this point. As we proceed with Arjuna's questions, you'll find that the style is a little lighter, which will allow us to go through the verses more quickly. So let us proceed. Arjuna vacha, yo yam yogastvaya proktaha, yo yam yogastvaya proktaha, samyena madhusudana, etasyaham na pashyami, chanchalatvat stitim stiram. Good. So here we have the first of two questions by Arjuna. His first question, he says to Sri Krishna, Yaha ayam proktaha yogaha tvaya proktaha yoyam yogaha. That yoga, this yoga, and yoga here means meditation. In chapter 6, yoga means meditation. In chapter 3, yoga means karma yoga. In chapter 12, yoga will mean bhakti. Here it means meditation. So yoyam yogaha, this meditation, tvaya proktaha, which was taught by you, O Krishna. In fact, next line, Madhusudana, O destroyer of the demon Madhu, O Madhusudana, O Krishna. This meditation which you have taught, samyena, literally as equanimity, but a better translation in this context would be as sameness, because Arjuna here is referring to the last few verses where Sri Krishna was describing the outcome of meditation for the skillful meditator, the long-time meditator who can discover Sri Krishna's divine presence in all and everything existing within Krishna. Sri Krishna abides in all, and all abides in Sri Krishna. This was our last topic, last several verses. We call that samatva buddhi, the buddhi, the attitude of samatva, of sameness, Sri Krishna being the same in all and everything abiding in Sri Krishna. So Arjuna acknowledges that topic, that meditation which you described samyena as the sameness, O Krishna, etasya, of that sameness, actually etasya set aside, aham na pashyami, I do not see it, as we say in American English, I don't get it. I don't understand it. I don't comprehend it. Why? Chanchalatvat, because of the fickleness, etasya, probably of mind, stitim, the condition, etasya, of my mind, which is tiram, which continues, the continued condition of my mind being chanchala, being unstable. So, to paraphrase this verse, Arjuna says that you were teaching this ultimate realization through the practice of meditation, realizing the sameness of Sri Krishna in all and all in Sri Krishna. But Arjuna says, I don't get it. I don't understand it because my mind continues to be fickle. And he describes that fickleness in a very poignant way in the next verse. Chanchalam himana Krishna, chanchalam himana Krishna, pramati balavadridham, pramati balavadridham, tasyaham nigraham manye, tasyaham nigraham manye, vayoriva sudushkaram, vayoriva sudushkaram. So here, Arjuna is complaining about the unsteadiness of his mind. And he says, O Krishna, in the first line, O Krishna, he indeed, manaha, my mind, is chanchalam, literally restless, always moving. He says, my mind, pramati, it churns, literally, it churns, balavat, forcefully, my mind is churning, dridham, and it's, in this context, it's stubborn. It doesn't respond, Arjuna complains, it doesn't respond to his efforts to control his mind. So prior to chapter 6, Arjuna has certainly tried to practice meditation on his own. Clearly, he hasn't been successful. So he begins with this description. My mind is so intensely restless, it continues to churn forcefully. It can't be restrained. And he describes how difficult Arjuna finds it to restrain his mind in the second half. Tasya, of my mind, aham, I, manye, I consider the nigraham, restraining my mind. I consider the restraint of my mind to be, in the last time, sudushkaram, extremely hard to accomplish. How hard to accomplish? As difficult as restraining, as the restraint of vayoho iva. Vayu is air or wind. So Sri Krishna says, it's as hard to control my mind as it is to control the wind. And wind is a perfect metaphor because it's always blowing in one direction or another direction. Occasionally the wind is calm, quiet, but much of the time it's blowing and blowing in different directions. So Arjuna uses this metaphor to describe his mind. Occasionally it's quiet, but most of the time it's blowing in one direction or another, which is to say it's constantly moving in one direction or another. Now, two comments about this verse. One is its timing. So notice Arjuna here is complaining about how difficult it is to control his mind. If he asked this question at the beginning of the chapter, it would make perfect sense. He said, "Oh Krishna, my mind is hard to control." But Sri Krishna has just gone on and given Arjuna a long, detailed, thorough description of how to control your mind. Remember the verses where Sri Krishna says, whenever your mind wanders, you bring it back. You bring your mind again. You bring your mind back again and again and again. Notice that Arjuna asks this question after Sri Krishna has already taught all of this. So it would appear that the timing is odd. It's almost a minor joke. Sometimes people don't, in a lecture, sometimes people don't get it. Here in Sri Krishna's discourse on meditation, to some extent, Arjuna doesn't get it. He was paying attention, I think, no doubt, but sometimes even though you pay attention, you don't get it. So here, the second comment is, if you have difficulty understanding these very profound teachings, you're in good company. Even Arjuna, who is the greatest student of Dronacharya, the great teacher, Arjuna was his greatest student. So even this great student of Dronacharya, even he doesn't get it all the time. So if you have difficulty in understanding some of these profound teachings, you're in good company, as they say. Okay, we'll continue. Excuse me. Now we'll see Sri Krishna's response. Shri Bhagavan Uvacha, Shri Bhagavan Uvacha, Asamshayam Mahabaho, Asamshayam Mahabaho, Mano Durnigraham Chalam, Mano Durnigraham Chalam, Abhyasena tu Kaunteya, Abhyasena tu Kaunteya, Vairagyena cha grihyate, Vairagyena cha grihyate. Here we have Sri Krishna's response to Arjuna's question. And he begins, Mahabaho, O mighty armed Arjuna, asamshayam, without doubt. Mano is the word manas. Manas, the mind, your mind, is chalam, always wandering, and it is durnigraham. It is difficult to restrain, difficult to control. Interesting. Arjuna's question could be considered as inappropriate, or he wasn't paying attention, or he just didn't get it. Please note that Sri Krishna here doesn't criticize Arjuna for his question, but instead validates validates Arjuna's question. And just a hint, sometimes a hint for all people. Many times you'll be with a friend or someone who asks a question which you consider an inappropriate question, or in simple terms, a dumb question. If your friend asks a dumb question, the worst thing in the world you can do is to criticize your friend. Look what Sri Krishna does here. He validates Arjuna. He says, of course, the mind is difficult to control. And then Sri Krishna goes on to answer Arjuna's question. So very important here, never to even when a question doesn't seem appropriate or doesn't seem well considered, every question is important and should be taken with full, should be embraced. Okay, let's see Sri Krishna's now instruction. So what should Arjuna do, since his mind continues to wander, in spite of all of this powerful teaching by Sri Krishna? So Sri Krishna actually here, he paraphrases from the famous Yoga Sutra. Yoga Sutra, as you know, is the work of the Rishi Patanjali, and it is the source scripture, the fundamental teachings on meditation in the Hindu tradition. And here Sri Krishna paraphrases from the great Yoga Sutra about how to control the mind. He says, Abhyasena tu Kaunteya, Kaunteya, O son of Kunti, O Arjuna, but abhyasena, through abhyasa, continued practice, vairagyena cha, and through dispassion, grihyate, the mind can be literally grasped, but controlled. Through abhyasa, continued practice, and vairagya, detachment, the mind grihyate, can be controlled. These two words, abhyasa and vairagya, are used by Patanjali in his Yoga Sutras. They're very important words, so let's take a moment just to consider them. The first one is fairly obvious. Abhyasa, practice. We've said right at the beginning of this chapter that meditation is a learned skill. How do you acquire any skill? Abhyasa, practice. How much practice? You keep practicing it until you get it. If you've ever heard a musician practice, you'll hear that musician performing the same musical passage again and again and again, not just once or twice, but the same, a difficult passage. They will perform the passage again and again and again and again. Why? That repeated practice is what's required to master that passage of music. So too in meditation, the key to meditation, as we discussed before, is you have to keep practicing. And in the most direct sense, whenever your mind wanders, you bring it back. Mind wanders, bring it back. How many times do you have to bring your mind back? As many times as it wanders. Is that continual practice of bringing your mind back. Here Sri Krishna calls it abhyasa. Abhyasa, we translate as practice. Literally, it means repetition. You just continue to repeat that practice. The second word he uses, also drawn from Patanjali's Yoga Sutras, is vairagya. Now, vairagya means dispassion. And when we look at it as dispassion, it seems a little out of context. What does dispassion have to do with meditation? Well, the flip side of dispassion is commitment. In order to be committed to the practice of meditation, you have to be dispassionate towards other activities of life. And at the beginning of this chapter, we discussed how the very act of sitting in a quiet place and closing your eyes is an act of withdrawing from worldly activities for the sake of devoting yourself, dedicating yourself to the practice of meditation. And here, the word vairagya is referring to that very act, the act of withdrawing yourself from your ordinary worldly activities, the deliberate act of setting aside some time in the day to, especially for the, specifically for the practice of meditation. That's an act of detachment, an act of withdrawing from worldly activities and dedicating yourself to the practice of meditation. So these are the two words used by Patanjali in his Yoga Sutras, and here used by Sri Krishna in giving instruction to Arjuna. If your mind continues to wander, what should you do? Abhyasa, continued practice, and vairagya, withdrawal from worldly activities and commitment to the practice of meditation. Okay. Sri Krishna continues. Asamyatatmana yogo, asamyatatmana yogo, dushprapahiti me matihi, dushprapahiti me matihi, vashyatmana tu yatata, vashyatmana tu yatata, shakyo vaptumupayataha, shakyo vaptumupayataha. So Sri Krishna's answer here is just these two verses, the prior verse and this verse. So his response to Arjuna's question is very brief, but very much to the point. So Sri Krishna concludes here saying, yogaha, end of the first line. Again, yoga in this context means meditation. Meditation is, in the second line, dushprapa, difficult to obtain, difficult to master. Meditation is difficult for whom? Asamyatatmana. In the first line, asamyata atma atmana. By one, and here atma again means mind, as it means so often in the Bhagavad Gita. By one whose mind is asamyata. Yata, controlled. Samyata, completely controlled. Asamyata, not completely controlled, or even completely uncontrolled. You can give it that meaning. So by one whose mind is not completely controlled, yogaha, meditation, is dushprapa. It is difficult. It is difficult to establish your mind in that condition where it has stopped wandering and it has come to rest on the inner self. That was the technique Sri Krishna taught, is to restrain your mind from wandering, to focus your attention within, on your true self, Satchidananda Atma, which is that so-called inner divinity, which Sri Krishna says is his own presence within you, to make your mind reside within, on that inner truth, the reality of who you are. And Sri Krishna acknowledges that for one whose mind has not been well trained, for one whose mind continues to wander, to perform this meditation, dushprapaha, it is difficult. Iti me matihi. Thus it is my understanding, my contention, my perspective. It is my perspective. It is my understanding that that an uncontrolled mind is incapable of doing the kind of meditation that Sri Krishna has just taught. But, in fact, in the third line, that tu in the middle is but. But, yatata, by one who strives, vashyatmana, by one whose mind, here again, atma meaning mind, by one whose mind is vashya, controlled, by one whose mind is controlled, by one who has gained the skill of bringing that mind, restraining the mind from wandering around, and leading that mind within to focus on the truth of yourself, to reside on your inner self. And remember, that skill is gained how? Abhyasa and vairagya. Abhyasa through repeated practice, and vairagya through withdrawing from worldly activities and committing yourself to this practice of meditation. So yatata, by striving, vashyatmana, with a mind that is well controlled, well disciplined, well trained. Sri Krishna says, shakyaha avaptum. It is shakyaha, it is possible, avaptum, to gain, to accomplish that state of deep meditation, as taught by Sri Krishna earlier in this chapter. It is possible to do that with a mind that is disciplined and trained. And he includes one more important word here, upayataha, through various upayas. Upaya is a means. And in this context, upaya would specifically mean technique. Upayataha, by various techniques, it is possible to restrain your mind and focus it within. And perhaps Sri Krishna is pointing this out here at the end of his discourse on meditation. He's pointing it out because there are a great many different meditation techniques. Again, the word upaya he uses means technique. And as we've discussed, Sri Krishna gives his particular meditation technique when he teaches meditation to Arjuna. But as we've observed, there are many techniques, and here, by saying upayataha, perhaps Sri Krishna is suggesting that if his technique doesn't work, maybe you can try some other techniques. He doesn't explicitly say that, and perhaps I'm reading something into this verse that he doesn't really specifically say. But I think it's worthwhile saying that there are so many meditation techniques, and I think I commented earlier in this chapter that as a meditation teacher, I learned that some techniques work very well for some people and don't work very well for other people. As a meditation teacher, I've learned that different techniques have different degrees of effectiveness for different students. We're all different. And so perhaps here in that word upayataha, maybe Sri Krishna is acknowledging the same truth, that if one technique doesn't work for you, you should try another technique. He doesn't explicitly say it here, but I think it is true. If a particular technique, even this technique taught by Sri Krishna, if it is not effective for you, then what should you do? Try a different technique. There are so many. By the way, a very practical suggestion, if you want to learn other meditation techniques, most of you know that I've recently published on YouTube a series of meditations called A Course on Meditation, and it is a series of 42 very short lessons, and most of those lessons introduce various techniques. So if you go through that course in meditation on YouTube, watch the videos, study the lessons, you can learn a great number of techniques, and then you can try those techniques in your daily practice, and you can discover which techniques work well for you, which techniques don't work so well for you. Those that don't work well, you set them aside. Those which work well for you, you can then incorporate into your daily practice of meditation. It's called A Course in Meditation. It's freely available on YouTube. Okay, with that verse, Sri Krishna concludes his instructions on meditation with the next, excuse me, with the next verse. Arjuna asks a question which leads to the final topic of the chapter. And the final topic of the chapter, I'll just give you the general idea and then we'll see the verses. The final topic is what happens to someone who, as I said before, you withdraw from other worldly activities, you focus your attention on meditation. So what if you are unsuccessful in your efforts to restrain your mind? So notice you've already given up you've turned your back on worldly activities. So in one way, you've turned away from worldly activities. Then suppose you fail in your efforts in meditation. Meditation here called yoga. So yoga bhrashta is the technical term. Bhrashta, fallen. So one who is yoga bhrashta, one who has fallen in his or her practice of yoga, one who has been unsuccessful in the practice of meditation is called yoga bhrashta, and that is the last topic, which Arjuna introduces with this question. Arjuna Vacha, ayate shraddhayo peto, ayate shraddhayo peto, yoga chalita manasaha, yoga chalita manasaha, aprapya yoga samsiddhim, aprapya yoga samsiddhim, kam gatim Krishna gacchati, kam gatim Krishna gacchati. So Arjuna asks, ayatihi. Remember prior verse we had that word yatata, by one who strives. Here he uses the word ayatihi, by one who is unsuccessful in striving, by one who, either by one who doesn't strive, or one whose efforts to strive to restrain the mind is unsuccessful. That ayatihi, that one who strives unsuccessfully. In the second line, one who is yogat chalita manasaha, one whose mind, manas, is chalita, wandered away, yogat, from yoga, literally from meditation. One whose mind has wandered away from meditation, one whose mind continues to wander. In spite of practicing whatever technique is being practiced, the technique fails to restrain the mind. The meditator fails to focus the attention within. The meditator is just helplessly, the meditator's mind is helplessly swept away by the currents of the mind, like the wind, in Arjuna's question before, in Arjuna's complaint before. But this meditator is not lazy. In fact, Sri Krishna includes a very important word here in the first line, shraddhaya upetaha. We have to break the words apart. This meditator is upeta, endowed with shraddha, literally with faith. But it means that this meditator continues to be committed to the practice of meditation. This meditator continues to be turned away from worldly activities and focused on the practice of meditation. Shraddhaya upetaha, which means even though the meditator is unsuccessful in meditation, the meditator doesn't give up because of shraddha, because of faith, because of trust, because of commitment. In fact, that's what it says in the third line, aprapya, without gaining, yoga samsiddhim. Samsiddhi, perfection, accomplishment of yoga. Yoga samsiddhi, the full accomplishment of what is to be achieved through yoga, meditation, which means enlightenment. So this meditator who continues to try to restrain the mind, but fails to restrain the mind, but this meditator, because of shraddha, because of their faith, because of their commitment, they continue to try even though they are unsuccessful. So this leads to Arjuna's question, Kagatim Krishna? O Krishna, Kagatim gacchati, kam gatim, to what end gacchati does such a person go? Figuratively, what happens to such a person? Notice the setup here in Arjuna's question. Oftentimes, when we fail in some activity, we eventually give up. But here Arjuna says, what happens to this meditator? Excuse me. What happens to this meditator who, in spite of being unsuccessful, this meditator doesn't give up? Shraddhaya, because of this meditator's shraddha, faith, commitment, dedication. What happens to this meditator? Arjuna goes on to say, Kachinno bhaya vibrashtash, Kachinno bhaya vibrashtash, Chinnabhramiva nashyati, Chinnabhramiva nashyati, Apratishto mahabaho, Apratishto mahabaho, Vimudho brahmanah pati, Vimudho brahmanah pati. So Arjuna continues to ask, Kachit. Kachit is an interrogative particle, and it doesn't have an exact translation. But here, Kachit na. Is it not that Ubhaya vibrashtaha? Is it not that this meditator is vibrashta, fallen away, Ubhaya, from both? Is it not, Kachitna, is it not the case that this meditator is vibrashta, is fallen away, Ubhaya, from both meaning from both worldly pursuits and the spiritual pursuit? We've said that that word vairagya we saw before means to withdraw from worldly activities and commit yourself, dedicate yourself to meditation. So in this way, you withdraw. In fact, remember we've said before that in spiritual life comes a very crucial point where you recognize the impossibility of worldly pursuits leading you to perfect peace and contentment. That recognition that no amount of worldly efforts will ever lead you to perfect peace and contentment, that's a withdrawal from worldly life. Even if you continue to go to work and take care of your family, in your mind, in your heart, you are no longer dedicated to trying to gain perfect peace and contentment through worldly pursuits. This is a kind of withdrawal. And as I said, it can be, if you're a good karma yogi, you continue to go to work, you continue to take care of your family and other responsibilities. But in your mind and heart, you have withdrawn in the sense that you no longer consider those worldly pursuits as the ultimate means to perfect peace and contentment. So you are withdrawn then from worldly pursuits, and here Arjuna says, what happens to the one who has already withdrawn from worldly pursuits and then fails in his or her practice of meditation? This is ubhaya, a failure in both ways. First, you failed to gain perfect peace and contentment through worldly pursuits. And then second, you failed to get perfect peace and contentment through meditation. You failed to get enlightenment. So you failed ubhaya. In both ways, you have vibrashtaha, you have failed. Kachinna, is it not true then that this meditator, vibrashtaha, has failed ubhaya in both ways, has failed to gain perfect peace and contentment through worldly means, and has failed to gain perfect peace and contentment through meditation? So Arjuna's question, remember in the prior verse, he says, Kam gatim gachati. What happens to this meditator? And now Arjuna gives another beautiful metaphor. He says, is it not, in the second line, Chinna abram eva nashyati. Chinna abram. Abram is a cloud. Abram is a cloud. Chinna, a cloud which is cut, which means an isolated cloud, not a thick mat of clouds in the sky, but an isolated cloud in the sky, drifting. And if you've ever watched clouds, sometimes you can watch those isolated clouds evaporate. They shrink and disappear. This is Arjuna's metaphor. Would that person not be like that isolated cloud and Chinabhramiva, like that isolated cloud, nashyati, get destroyed. So like that isolated cloud evaporates and fades away, would this meditator who has failed to gain perfect peace and contentment through worldly means, who has failed to gain perfect peace and contentment through meditation, would this meditator not be destroyed? He says in the third line, apratishtaha, without having a firm footing. Like the cloud, that isolated cloud is not part of a big mass of clouds, but is isolated and therefore subject to being destroyed, fading away. O Mahabaho, O mighty armed Krishna. So Mahabaho is a term of address that can be used for anyone who is mighty. Not only Arjuna is mighty, but Krishna too is mighty. Therefore, Krishna is addressed as Mahabaho, O mighty armed one, O great one. O Krishna, would that meditator who has failed in both ways, would that meditator not be apratishtaha, without a firm footing, which means not firmly footed in worldly life, nor firmly footed in spiritual life, having failed to gain perfect peace and contentment in worldly life, having failed to gain it through meditation, would this meditator not be, in the last line, vimudaha, confused, or better yet, lost? Lost on the pati, on the path, brahmanaha, the path leading to Brahman, the path leading to absolute reality, the path leading to enlightenment. Would this meditator not be lost on the path to enlightenment? The meditator has already left the worldly path and now is on a spiritual path and is now lost on the spiritual path. What happens to such a meditator? Arjuna continues and concludes his question. Etan me samshayam Krishna, etan me samshayam Krishna, hetumarhasya sheshataha, chetumarhasya sheshataha, tvaranya samshayasyasya, tvaranya samshayasyasya, chetana hyupapadyate, chetana hyupapadyate. Etat me samshayam Krishna. O Krishna, etat, when you break the words apart, it becomes etat. This is me samshayam. This is my doubt, O Krishna. This is my confusion. So Arjuna is fearful. You have to now, just to do a little psychological analysis, Arjuna is fearful that he might get lost on this path. Arjuna has already undergone this inner transformation where he recognizes that no amount of worldly effort will lead to perfect peace and contentment. Arjuna has undergone that inner transformation as a result of what Sri Krishna taught starting in chapter 2. So Arjuna has already left the worldly path, and now Arjuna is worried. What happens if he gets lost on the spiritual path? So notice Arjuna doesn't say, what would happen to me? But he puts it in the third person. What would happen to someone who gets lost on the path to Brahman? But reading in between the lines, you can easily suppose that Arjuna is not wondering in the abstract what happens to someone who gets lost or fails on the spiritual path, but Arjuna, in fact, is worried about himself. What if I get lost on the spiritual path? What if I fail to gain enlightenment in this lifetime through the practice of meditation and with the help of all these spiritual teachings? So Arjuna's question, even though it's uttered in the third person, it's a personal question. Arjuna's worried. What if I fail to gain enlightenment? O Krishna, etat me samshayam. This is my doubt. This is my question. And chetum arhasi asheshataha. Breaking the words apart. Arhasi, you can chetum, remove my doubt, asheshataha, completely. It's a polite way of asking a question. Oh, Krishna, you are able to remove my doubt, means please remove my doubt and remove it completely. Tvat anyaha, other than you, samshayasya asya, for this, samshaya, for this doubt, tvat anyaha, other than you, cheta, one who can remove, anyone other than you, na upapadyate, it is not possible that anyone other than you can remove my doubt. This is a very typical style of the Mahabharata. Other than you, there is no one in the world who can remove my doubt. You alone can remove my doubt. Very typical of the Mahabharata style. O Krishna, you alone are my refuge. Only you can remove my doubt. Please answer me. Please remove my doubt. And remember, it's a very personal doubt. Arjuna worries, what happens if I fail on my path of spiritual growth? And Sri Krishna begins his answer. Shri Bhagavan Uvacha, Shri Bhagavan Uvacha, Partha Naiveha Namutra, Partha Naiveha Namutra, Vinashastasya Vidyate, Vinashastasya Vidyate, Nahi Kalyana Krit Kaschata, Nahi Kalyana Krit Kaschata, Durgatim Tata Gacchati, Durgatim Tata Gacchati. Partha, O Arjuna, na eva iha na amutra, breaking all the parts. Na iha, not here, na amutra, not there. Not here, not there. Now, referring to what? Na iha, not in this life, na amutra, not there in the next life. So not here in this life, nor in the next life. Eva, indeed, vinashaha, loss, destruction. Vidyate, would there be. Tasya, for that person who is ubhaya brashta. So for the one who has turned away from the effort to gain perfect peace and contentment through worldly activities, and for that one who has so far failed to gain enlightenment on a spiritual path, tasya, for that person, navidyate, there will not be any loss, any destruction, vinashaha, either iha, in this life, amutra, or in the next life. We'll read through the verse and then I'll explain what's going on here. So first of all, Sri Krishna begins with this assurance to Arjuna. So Arjuna has two verses before, Arjuna is worried that the meditator who fails will be destroyed like that vanishing cloud. So here, Sri Krishna begins with an assurance. No, no, no. There will not be any such destruction for such a person who turns away from worldly life and then fails in spiritual life. There will not be any loss, there will not be any destruction. Why? Third line, because. Kalyana krit, for one who is a doer of that which, kalyana means that which is auspicious. For one who is engaged in this auspicious activity means the pursuit of spiritual growth. Na kaschit, no one, kalyana krit, no one who is engaged in a process of spiritual growth, durgatim gacchati, goes to durgatim, a bad end. And so loosely, no one ends up badly. I'll paraphrase. No one who is engaged in a path of spiritual growth, no one ends up badly. No one goes to ruin. Tata is this very expression of fondness. Oh, dear one. Oh, Arjuna, oh, dear one. No one who is engaged in this process of spiritual growth will end up badly. Now, we need to establish why is that so. Notice that we're talking about one who has given up on worldly pursuits for the sake of perfect peace and contentment and has so far failed to gain perfect peace and contentment through spiritual means. That sounds like a pretty bad situation. You failed in both regards. So how is it that Sri Krishna can assure Arjuna that no one who is on this path of spiritual growth, no one ends up badly? And he's going to explain in great detail in the coming verses. Let me just give you an overview of what he's going to explain. Why is it that one engaged in a process of spiritual growth will not end up badly? There are two reasons. Karma and samskara. And this is going to be explained in great detail. Here we're coming towards the end of the class, so let me give you a sneak preview of Sri Krishna's elaborate explanation in the coming verses. For karma and samskara. First, karma. Karma means action, and as you know, every action has a result. The pursuit of spiritual growth is karma. You are making an effort to gain spiritual growth, and that action or effort will have two different kinds of phala or results. Remember our discussion of the doctrine of karma way back in chapter 2. I think we discussed in some detail that according to the doctrine of karma, every deed has two kinds of results. One kind of result that happens immediately. We call that drishta phala, the immediate seen result. Every deed also has a second result called adrishta phala, a result that is not seen immediately, a result that is delayed or deferred, a result that bears fruit at some later time and place. So, your engagement in a process of spiritual growth is a karma. That karma must necessarily have both of these results, which means there will be a drishta phala, an immediate result, and a deferred result. Now, the immediate result of your process of spiritual growth, let's be more specific, meditation. The immediate result of meditation, since that's our context, the immediate result of meditation may not be enlightenment. there are so many other factors required to gain enlightenment. We said before that meditation was not in and of itself adequate for meditation. Without meditation, you won't get enlightened, but meditation itself won't make you enlightened. So the sole practice of meditation may or may not result in enlightenment. But even if it doesn't result in enlightenment, it still has some benefit. Absolutely, the practice of meditation will make your mind more calm, more peaceful, more friendly. I smile when I say this because I think of mind as a companion who is with you pretty much all the time. When you're not asleep, your mind is a companion who's with you. And as you know, your mind is sometimes in a good mood, making your mind a very nice companion. And sometimes your mind is not in a very good mood. It can be in a very foul mood, in which case your mind is a lousy companion, even a terrible companion. So, one effect of meditation is to make your mind a better companion. Even if you don't gain enlightenment through the practice of meditation, at the very least, it will make your mind more pleasant, more easily managed, more pleasant to be around, a better companion. Guaranteed. Why? Every karma has a result. So the practice of meditation will certainly make your mind a better companion. How much better? That depends on the individual. Okay. And we said that the practice of meditation, being a karma, has two results. So the immediate seen result is that your mind will become a better companion, again, even if you don't reach enlightenment. But then there's the second, adrishtapala, the deferred result. And the deferred result is that later so obviously the practice of meditation is a punya karma. It is a good karma. It is a deed such that you will receive a good result from that meditation at some future time and place. Later in this life, or perhaps in the next life, your meditation will bless you in some way or another, some way that you can't anticipate, you can't foresee, you can't discover how that adrishtapala will fructify. But in one way or another, that second deferred result of your act of meditation will help you, will bless you at some way, in some form, at some time and place in the future. These are the two results of karma, drishtapala, adrishtapala. For every karma, these two results must occur. So based on that, Sri Krishna assures Arjuna that if your practice of meditation doesn't culminate in enlightenment, you will still be benefited by both of these good results of the act of meditation. Then there's a second kind of benefit which Sri Krishna is going to talk about. Again, here's a sneak preview. I said one benefit is through karma, and the other is through samskara. Now, what is samskara? Literally, it means impression. And here it means an impression on your mind, and specifically, a kind of impression on your mind that survives death. Now, generally, we say that when you are reborn without memories of your prior lives. You are reborn more or less with a clean slate, as psychologists like to say. Your mind is born blank. And then onto that blank mind, all of your experiences in life leave their impressions and you build up your mind in this way. But we all recognize that an infant is born not exactly as a blank slate, but there is some uniqueness in every infant. Sometimes they're very minor things, sometimes they're very prominent things. Not for infants, but later a child can be found to be a child prodigy and have some unique skills in mathematics or music or something. How to explain these child prodigies? Mozart, by the time he was 7 years old, Mozart was touring Europe giving piano concerts at the age of 7. How is that even possible? Child prodigy. According to the doctrine of karma, we explain such child prodigies like this. That is, in a prior life, very intense activity leaves some kind of impression on the mind, an impression that is so strong, so deep, that that impression follows along with the mind. The mind goes into an unresolved condition, a unmanifest condition at the time of death. That mind travels along with the sukshma sharira, the subtle body, takes on another physical body. So it is believed and taught, according to the doctrine of karma, that certain impressions can remain with a mind in an unmanifest condition as it travels to the next life, and then that unmanifest mind becomes manifest with that deep impression or samskara from a prior life. Going back to Mozart, we might presume that in his prior life, he was a highly accomplished musician, and the intense engagement in music left some kind of impression or samskara in his mind, and in his next life, that samskara became manifest as he was a child prodigy. So, suppose there is someone who is deeply engaged in meditation, meditating for hours and hours every day, but then failing to get enlightenment in this life. Well, that deep, intense practice of meditation could possibly leave a samskara in that person's mind. And at the end of this life, that mind becomes unmanifest, that mind travels on, gets invested in a new body. That samskara could be manifest, which means the benefits of meditation in a prior life, those benefits could become manifest again in a later life due to samskara. This is the second way where this meditator who fails to get enlightenment in this life can still be blessed through the efforts. In the two ways, through karma and through samskara. And in the coming verses, Sri Krishna is going to explain this in quite some detail, how karma and samskara can bless that meditator who fails to get enlightenment in this lifetime. And we'll see that in the next class. Om Sarve Bhavantu Sukhinaha Sarve Santu Niramayaha Sarve Bhadrani Pashyantu Ma Kaschid Dukkha Bhag Bhaveta Asato Ma Satkamaya Tamaso Ma Jyotirgamaya Mrityorma Amritangamaya. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Om Tat Sat.